am Amy Vetter, and welcome to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. This valuable time is for you to pause in your day and go on your own self-journey. Discover the beliefs that are holding you back from living your best life at work and at home. Learn from the guests on this show as they share their inspirational stories on how they found ways to break internal beliefs that were no longer serving them. Because if you believe you can, you will. And our podcast begins now. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs, where I interviewed Jana Axline, who is a focused leader who achieves ambitious results. She drives ideas from initiation to implementation, achieving successful outcomes for clients. She is the immediate past president of the Project Management Institute Mile High Chapter, and she speaks internationally on project management, employee engagement, and leadership. She is an active PMP, ACP, certified Scrum professional, and scaled agilist, and has a Master's of Business Administration and Finance from the University of Colorado. My conversation with Jana spans her career from starting out in music and wanting to be an actress to ending up as a project manager, and her journey of how she learned from the jobs along the way that have helped her in really leading these projects to success. Welcome to this episode of Breaking Beliefs. I am with Jana Axline today. And Jana, would you like to start off and just give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Jana Axline. I started a project management consulting company about 5 years ago because I'm so passionate about project management. In addition to that, I'm the past president of the Project Management Institute's Mile High Chapter, which is a chapter that services project management professionals in the industry. I just really enjoy project management and kind of all things project management. It takes up my life.
Yeah. And I think project management is such an important topic on its own. I know a lot of times people think they're doing that, but they're not actually trained. They have other specialties that they do. I'm a CPA, and a lot of times, there's tons of projects going through a firm or a corporation and things like that. And not really understanding the importance of the difference of what a project manager does to keep that on task. So maybe you can just explain that first before we get into your story.
Yeah. So I find, to what you said, there's kind of a couple of things that happen. Either people are doing project management and they don't realize it, or they are project managers, but they fell into it and they didn't choose that as a career. But project management actually it touches every person's life, whether it's at work or at home, because really a project is something that just has a defined start and a defined end, and meaning it's just not a continuous thing. So you build a house, that's a project. You decorate for Christmas, that's a project, and so there are a lot of projects at work, and the thing that a project manager is responsible for, the key things are keeping things on time, making sure you stay in the budget, and keeping things within the scope, meaning you're doing what you said you would do and nothing more and nothing less. And so the challenge there is, as a project manager, you have to orchestrate everybody else. Oftentimes you're not doing everything yourself. You're relying on other people. So I really look at project managers as kind of like a conductor of an orchestra, and really understanding which pieces are supposed to come in at which time, and making sure that everybody is doing things within the right time at the right moment, with the right volume and all of those pieces, so that you have a lovely, piece of music that you're hearing. And so that's really how I kind of view a project manager.
Did you have a musical background? I play violin and viola, so.
I play piano and flute. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So was that growing up, or where did you?
I played flute growing up. I still have it. And every once in a while, once every 5 years, play with it. So I still play the piano fairly regularly,
Oh, wow. Good for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So So let's kind of start backward of just understanding your journey into the career that you have today. So when you were young, what was it that you wanted to be when you grew up?
Well, I think there was president and actress and lawyer and banker, but never had even heard of a project manager. And so I actually had quite the eclectic journey when I graduated because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, I really wanted to be an actress, I think, at that point. But, my parents were not very supportive of that. And so, when I first got out of college, I think I worked something like 8 jobs before I finally found project management. I mean, I did make movies, but I was on the backside of the camera doing production support, and then from there I was a registered securities assistant, meaning I could trade stocks and bonds, and then I was a legal secretary, and then worked for Starbucks, worked for Banana Republic. Then I started catching shoplifters. And then moved into management at Target. And there it was a huge growth experience for me because Target really focuses on personal growth. And so the microscope is on you all the time. And in that time, I really enjoyed my time there, but also found, within a couple of years that it probably wasn't the best fit for me, especially long term. But Target paid for my MBA.
Okay.
And so I had an undergrad in international business, and I was getting an MBA with an emphasis in finance. And the last semester, I had to take a production management course. And I had to do that in my undergrad, and I hated it. It was one of the worst classes I had to take. And so as I was looking through the course.
What made it bad?
Oh, I don't even remember. It was so long ago, but the only thing I remember out of it was that we read a book called The Goal. And The Goal is kind of a dry book. It's written, it's about production management, but it's written kind of like a story. And the only part of the entire book that I remember, and it was a valuable lesson, was like these students, the author was taking a group of boys on, a camping trip, and he had to get the boys, where they were walking through the woods, and they were walking single file, and he was leading, and there was one kid that was always falling behind. And so he took that kid and he set them in front of the line so that kid set the pace. And so that's what's important about production management. Only thing I remember. But anyway, I was, trying to find the least of all evils. And I saw this thing called project management. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound too bad. All right, I'll take that course. And oh my goodness, it's like this entire career field is just for me. Like, this is me. And I was so excited. I couldn't wait to get a project management job. But of course, you heard my eclectic background. And so people weren't really that eager to hire somebody who had no project management experience. But fortunately for me, my professors suggested for me to join the Project Management Institute, the local chapter, and I did. And I jumped in with both feet and started actually, my first volunteer role was actually doing the symposium. I was the speaker selection. I did the speaker selection. And I volunteered there so that people got to know who I was and got to know what my capability was. And so I was so fortunate that because of that volunteer experience, when Cigna Healthcare was hiring for an IT project coordinator, somebody said, hey, we should hire Jana, and they let me interview, and I got the role. And that would have never happened if I hadn't have built the network within the chapter. I had no direct project management experience. Yeah, no direct project management experience, no IT experience. And yet they hired me, and it was awesome. I got promoted something like 3 times within 3.5 years. And so really it was a career field that was right for me. And
so when you said, just to go back a little bit, because you said, this is totally me, with your background, so I'm just trying to link why you thought that was totally you. Because, being an artsy creative isn't necessarily, a project manager is so detailed.
Yeah.
So what was it that really got you about it?
Well, I like checklists. I like checking things off the list.
Mm-hmm.
And the course I was taking was how to use Microsoft Project. And for those people who don't know, that's a tool that you can track all the tasks of a project and who's supposed to do them and when they're due and all of that. And it's so much fun to set it to 100% when it's done. But really, ultimately, it does translate to more, though. I really like seeing where we are and where we need to go and what are all the steps to get there. And then I like to coordinate people and facilitate problem solving so that we can get there on time. But yeah, the first thing that spoke to me was really that checking things off the list of being able to do the Microsoft project plan.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. It's just, it's always interesting to kind of see what is the thing that, I think,
Yeah.
A lot of accountants will say getting the balance sheet to even out and your deficit. So
Right,
it's a similar
right,
thing
right.
to that. Yeah. And then, and one of the things too that I think is challenging for a project manager, you're reference to orchestrating, but you're not directly responsible for anybody.
Right.
So
Yeah,
how do you overcome that? Because it takes real leader. Like, what kind of skills do you put in place, or the things that maybe from your past that you've been able to utilize and make it successful for you?
Yeah, that you could probably do an entire course on all of that. I think the place I learned the most though was actually Target, because when I was at Target, I really started researching employee engagement, because people could leave Target and go across the street to the competitor.
Right.
And so there was a strong emphasis on what employee engagement looked like. And so there was a few things that I did, because I am not naturally a pat people on the shoulder type of person. I expect us all to be there and to do our jobs and let's get them done. And in Target, you can't, and in retail, you can't have that perspective, because people are not paid as well. And so, you've really got to treat them well, otherwise they'll leave, because there has to be more than money that's keeping there, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So it's a little different in the corporate world. There are people who are, a little more, let's all just get our jobs done, but people still need that, those extra pieces, that's where we all learn about company culture and your boss valuing the team and things like that. So knowing that I wasn't that, I actually put it on my to-do list to go around and talk to people without an agenda. Because a lot of people, when I was at Target, felt like I didn't take the time to talk to them. I just came up and said, hey, can you get this done? Rather than, hey, what's on your workload today? How are things going? And building that relationship. So building relationships is important. I would say that's number one. Number two is making sure you can communicate the vision. So not everybody always understands why the project's important, or why hitting certain deadlines are important. And so communicating that vision is really critical. The other thing is really being a facilitator. In most cases, project managers are not the ones with all the answers. It's your team, and it's your job to get those answers out of the team. And so you need to be able to facilitate gathering those answers, to be able to build a schedule and manage risks and things like that. Second, you have to have those strong facilitation skills to help them problem solve. And de-escalate, making sure that when people are taking things personally, how do you help them step back and focus on the problem and not each other. And then finally, you have to know when to escalate. But escalating with here's the situation and here's my proposed solution, so that you're not just a person bringing up problems, but you're a person who's helping be part of the solution. But since you are not controlling over the resources, sometimes you do have to get other people who are in control involved.
Right.
But doing so tactfully is really important.
So do you think any of the interests that you had before, attorney, actress, all of those things, because some of those traits, I think, go hand in hand with some of the things that you were talking about?
Yeah, I really think Target was the biggest one for me. while I was, the other one would be Chick-fil-A. I worked as Chick-fil-A as a teenager, and I learned more about business there, I think, and customer service than I even did in my school, my university courses. So I would say Chick-fil-A had a big impact. Taking my MBA and having to read, there were a lot of good leadership books that I had to read, and had to take personality assessments and that. And then in Target, we had, like I already talked about, the employee engagement, and, we had like it's called a PIP. I just can't remember what it stands for. But basically, my development action plan. Mm-hmm. And, making sure that every week I was doing something to develop. And then finally in Cigna, I had mentors that I had 3 mentors that I chose. I did my own development action plan above and beyond what the company asked for. So I was constantly being introspective. And then finally they saw my leadership capability and sent me to a leading, it's called Leading for the Future course, which was another great way. I got a lot of good feedback. One time, one of my team members, after reviewing, we had to do these activities and then assess each other at the end, but you're assessing each other for leadership skills. And the person told me, "Hey, Jana, you're probably right 90% of the time. But if you would stop and have a conversation with people and really get other people's perspective, you'd probably be right 100% of the time." But it was just really impactful for me to remember, like, not to bulldoze over people and just run with solutions without really making sure that you've got the insight from other people.
Mm-hmm. So so you said Chick-fil-A, their customer service. What was so memorable about that for you that you learned?
Yeah, it was a few things. So I got to work for a great guy down in Colorado Springs. He, at the time, owned all the Chick-fil-A's down there. And I think he had worked at the Broadmoor when he was younger as a chef or something like that. And so the Broadmoor is obviously very high on customer service. And so, he just was constantly talking about simple things like keep your head up. So what I learned, what that meant was always be looking around, because I was a team lead. I got promoted as a team lead within a year of being there. And he always talked about it being like a car, and that you have to make sure that all the little pieces are working. So it's my job to be constantly observing all of that, making sure all those pieces are working. The other piece he talked about, like, these are little things, but he'd tell us we weren't allowed to say, "Have a nice day." And this was before, I know at Chick-fil-A now, a lot of people all say the same thing. They say something like my pleasure or something, but that was not a requirement when I worked there. But his big thing was, don't order people to have a nice day. He's like, we are not telling people what to do. And so, you could say, "I hope you have a nice day," or, "I hope you enjoy your meal," or something like that. And then we could never say the same thing to 2 people in a row. And so that it was personal. But yeah, I think the biggest thing I got from him was really being able to see the big picture, but also see the little details. Making sure that the tables were clean and that customers weren't waiting. And are you constantly looking at their body language to assess how their experience is? And then the final thing was never get tied down as a team lead, meaning I should never jump on a register and start taking orders, because if anything else goes wrong, I'm stuck there. And so it's really about, only jumping in places where you could eventually leave. And so I thought that was a really valuable lesson, because so many leaders want to jump in and solve the problem, and then they don't see what's headed their way because their head's down. Project managers do that all the time. Project managers that are too technical start trying to solve the technical problems, and rather than letting the technical teams do it.
Yeah.
And so then they get all wrapped up in the details and they miss what's headed their way.
Well, and I think that's just such an overall lesson of micromanagement, like all of those things where as a leader, because a lot of people get promoted based on their skills, but not necessarily their leadership skills, right? Like they're really good at what they do. And when, if you start doing everybody else's work, then you can't do the work of the leader and be able to do your next best thing so someone can step up.
Yep.
Yeah,
Completely.
that's huge. Yeah, I love that too, of just noticing the details and never saying the same thing twice. That's the real challenge.
Yeah.
And then, so you said at Cigna you had 3 mentors.
Yeah.
Can you give a little bit of background on that and, and how they helped?
Sure. So when I looked at mentors, I picked one who was in the department that I wanted to work in, so that I could build a relationship there and understand what that work would look like. And then he would know what I was capable of, and hopefully that would eventually clear the path. I picked a mentor who seemed kind of like me, but was better at the things that I felt I needed to get better at. Meaning, so she wasn't an overly bubbly, warm person, but she was good at connecting with people. Like, people were very loyal to her and they felt like she cared. And I really enjoyed that about her, and I wanted to emulate it. So I selected her as a mentor so I could talk to her about specific situations that came up and ask her how she would have dealt with it, or how should I deal with it, and just be able to glean some of that.
What did you adjust by learning from her?
It was really just, again, kind of going back and building those relationships. I think there's that theme kind of throughout my career of learning how to build relationships that aren't so focused on just getting the work done. And she did that too. She actually died early, or young, I should say. And I attended her funeral, and there were probably 300 people there.
Wow.
And so even that, years later, made an impact of, what are you doing in people's lives on a day-to-day basis? To help their growth, help them as a person, et cetera.
And then your third one?
The third one was actually assigned to me by corporate. Because they were starting a new mentoring program, and I asked them to give me a mentor, and she was, completely different from the rest. She was in an area that I wasn't necessarily interested in going in, but was, definitely a very good perspective. I believe she was like in finance and accounting, but not project finance, like completely like in, the finance department. And she was a very strong woman. I feel like I'm a pretty strong woman as well. And she was pretty strong, and she, cuts to the chase and just calls things like they are. And she was a person I actually, we had such different, I think, backgrounds in life that oftentimes I didn't agree with all her advice, but I found her perspective enabled me to better round out my decisions or the things that I was going to do. Meaning, I might have had a set plan, but by gaining her perspective, I'm like, oh, well, I could tweak it a little bit. Maybe I don't want to do it the way she's saying it, but I see where she's coming from, and I should tweak what I'm doing.
I think that's a really important lesson, is that a lot of times people think they have to emulate exactly somebody else. And it's more like picking the things that work and are comfortable in your own skin, because you still want to be unique.
Yeah, exactly.
How you deliver. Yeah. So how have you seen, from the things that you've learned and over time, that you've actually had impact on others in your career from some of those learnings, or what do you try to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of different examples. Like on a very personal level, I have somebody who is my accountability partner, and she loves to tell this story because she's actually a speaker, and she talks about how she kept telling me over and over that, she really hated what the work she was doing and she didn't like it. And so finally at one of our sessions, I said, quit your job or change your attitude, but we're not talking about this anymore. Because it was kind of to the point where, you quit being a victim. We are all in control of our circumstances. So if you don't want to quit the job, then you got to change your attitude, because this isn't healthy. And that was a pivotal moment in her life, because she actually did quit her job and she became a consultant and a speaker, and really went independent, which is what she wanted to do. So that really, it made me realize that we have impact on people sometimes when we don't even know it,
Yes.
because she came back and told me, but how many other people, whether positively or negatively, have I impacted through just day-to-day conversations? And so I try to remember that going into different encounters, that we don't always realize the impact we have on people. I didn't even remember that when she told me. It took me a while. I was like, oh yeah, okay. So that was not a significant conversation for me, but it was for her. The other thing is that when I started my company, because of all of this, I've really tried to come up with practices that are going to help make this a company that people want to work for. Really thinking about paying people fairly, paying them so that they know they're valued, coming up with bonus structures so that people want to contribute to the business, but they feel like they have power over it. Because in a large corporation, sometimes your bonus is tied to the stock price and earnings and all of these things that you really don't have control over in a 30,000 person company. And so I really wanted them to be tangible things. And so I worked on some stuff there, and then just try to implement activities within our company when it comes to, doing assessments as a team and then talking about what those mean to each other, letting people go to professional development things that they choose and paying for it. And while all of those things may sound like small, no big deal, it's a really big deal for a $1.5 million company to be able to do those things. I mean, that it takes us, it takes a lot out of our bottom line to be able to offer those things. But that's what I think is important. And that's how I try to give back to my people.
Yeah, that's great. So I like to end with some rapid fire questions. And you pick a category. So either family and friends, money, spiritual, or health.
All right, let's go with money.
Okay. Things or actions that I don't have that I want with money.
I think even with, this can relate to a lot of things. I have the yo-yo effect, so I'll be really good at saving, and then all of a sudden I'll get compulsive and buy things I probably, haven't budgeted for.
Things or actions that I do have that I want with money.
Well, I budget and track my spending on an almost daily basis. So I know where every dollar is assigned and where it goes. It goes back to the first part of making sure that those assigned dollars only go to the assigned place. But still, I know when I am not following my own rules.
Right. And you do it in your business as well as personal?
Yeah, and the business, I'm less compulsive. It's pretty clear of what we should be spending our money on. But yes, both of them have a budget and reconcile that on a almost daily basis.
That's great. So things or actions I don't have that I don't want with money.
To not know what I'm spending. I can't believe how many people are like, they
Yeah.
just spend money and they're like, yeah, I just pay off my credit card every month. And it's like, yeah, but how do you know like whether or not you'll have enough money to pay it off? Like, how can you live with that ambiguity?
Yeah, I agree. I was actually on a call with some entrepreneurs yesterday that are women, and I think a lot of women don't like to look at their numbers, as if that means like it's not happening.
Right. Stick your head in the sand. If I don't see
Yeah.
it, it's not happening. Yeah.
And take it personally, you know, how a business is doing versus like you got to look at it as an outside entity and what you can do and keep improving upon it. And if it isn't doing well, what do you have to shift, you know, rather than thinking like, oh, I'm doing bad or, you know, so.
Right.
All right, last one. Things or actions that I do have that I don't want with money.
Oh, I think that kind of goes to the first one, is really that. I mean, I just need to be better overall with longer forecast pieces. Like I'm not ready for retirement. And I think, you know, there's a risk in that. So really being a balanced, having discipline over the long term for balanced saving.
Yeah, really good point. And I think that's a good point for any entrepreneur, you know, when you're not in a salary job is putting that money away still. So yeah. So anything that you would like to make sure that people walk away with from this conversation or anything about the PMI Mile High chapter that you'd like to close out with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess two things. I think volunteering is a great way to break into an industry that you might not be in already, but want to get in, or if you want to make a job change within an industry. I think volunteering is a great way to get your name out there. And so, you know, at the Mile High chapter really did change my life. The second thing I guess I would just say is, you know, we should never be a victim of our circumstances. I mean, really, while life may put us into situations, once we're in a situation, we have control over it. And choosing to make the most out of a situation, regardless what it is going to get us further and not countering that.
Yeah, really great points. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time today and sharing your story. And I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this conversation. So
great.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for your time.
All right. And now some time for our mindful moments from this episode with Jana, where she really covered some really big leadership lessons that I think all of us should just step back and pause and think about before we enter back into our day. I loved the first thing she said about becoming a conductor of an orchestra. And no matter if you're a project manager, a leader, whatever that is realizing that there's so many different pieces that need to be coordinated and understanding how they harmonize together and not getting too bogged down in any one of those pieces, but noticing where one gets off track, where the music would actually sound different if you don't spend a little bit more time to lift it up and make sure that it gets back on track. So when we're thinking about our teams, it's important to understand people at a personal level. And when we see someone struggling, what is it that's actually creating that struggle? Is it something internal, or is it actually a job capability issue? But a lot of times, sometimes it's not a job capability, it's some fear or something that needs to be addressed in someone. And when we personally care, we can make sure that the team overall keeps operating. Another thing that she talked about, and I think in so many projects and change management that we deal with, is where she talked about that quote in the book about whatever your slowest part is, put it first, put it in the lead. And a lot of times when something's not going well or there's a part of your project that is going off the rails, it's easier to kind of just keep pushing that to the side and keep moving forward with the things that are moving faster. But if you don't take care of that part that you don't want to deal with, it actually can blow the whole thing up. So that was a really important lesson, I think, for all of us to take away and look at our current projects or teams and what piece of it is our slowest part that we're actually trying to avoid, and how can we put it in front. And when she was talking about, when you're entering a new field like she did with project management, didn't have experience, and she volunteered with the PMI association in order to get to know people. And I think this is true whether you're an entrepreneur, looking for a job, whatever it is. A lot of times we think it will come to us rather than understanding when we go in and serve, when we go in and volunteer, create community and a network, it helps us achieve the goals that we want in our life. So not expecting things to happen to us, but what do we need to do in order to create the result that we want and give back in order to get what we want. The other thing that I thought was really important, and I think it's somewhat a trait of a lot of leaders and people that need to get things done, is we're moving at such a fast pace that we're constantly just trying to keep everything on task and pushing an agenda forward, and really not just treating everyone as a human. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves, whether it is setting an agenda when we go and meet with other people, that on that agenda, we remind ourselves just to have open conversation that has nothing to do with the work that you're doing. Because the problem is, when we are seeing that we don't personally care about the other person, then they're not as motivated to get the work done as well. And also, in a lot of those personal conversations, you uncover things about another person that you realize might make the project even better. It's understanding the little nuances in that person. And by you having that deeper understanding of what makes them tick, you might be able to actually get things on task faster. So it's kind of slow down to speed up. But in order to make the shifts that you want, we have to realize that everyone's human and they want to connect. And she also had used the term just not bulldozing over people, and stop and actually have a conversation, which in our busy life is really hard. And those are the things, those mindfulness things that we have to incorporate in our day to remember to pause. Now, I just love the discussion about Chick-fil-A and the customer experience. And the first thing about never saying the same thing to each customer, of how do you shift it just a little bit to make that experience unique. And again, this kind of goes back to treating everyone as a human, whether they're a customer or an employee, that they don't think that you just say the same thing to everybody, that you actually personally are invested in them and care, and are pausing enough to assess their body language and other things that you may not pick up if you just have a script and you're just pushing through. The really important thing she talked about in that was not taking over a person's job or getting too deep in the weeds when you're a leader on a task of what is your escape plan, so that you are staying at a high enough level to keep a project moving, to keep a team moving, that you don't start doing their work for them. Because the thing is, when we start jumping in, then those people know we will jump in, and it's easier for them to back out because they think you're going to just redo what they're doing anyways. So it's important that you give people space to create what they create, come in and make your suggestions, and back out again, so that you can keep doing the other things that is important as a leader in moving an initiative forward, a company forward, whatever that is. And then I think when she talked about one of her mentors that had passed away, but she talked about how she was remembered. So even though she was a driver of getting work done, that people connected with her because she tried to make sure that the things that she did on a daily basis would be remembered. And that's, again, something we have to be mindful or slow down our day in order to think about what is a memorable thing that I can do for someone else or make their day better, or just pause a moment and see if they're stressed out or frustrated and why they are, and ask the question rather than ignoring it. So I think all in all, when we think about leadership or project management or change management, it's important that how we go about it with the attitude that we want to project is important, that it's not just something that happens to move through a project, that we want to create an energy, a culture where people want to engage and move forward. So if we feel like our attitude is going down or we're getting negative, then those are the points that we need to stop and pause and think about, what could we do different? How could we shift things? How could we just pivot it a little bit so that we can create a better experience for the people around us? Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to the Breaking Beliefs podcast. I hope you will take a moment to pause before entering back into your day to reflect on this podcast and note 1 to 2 actions you are inspired to do from today's conversation that you could incorporate into your life. To read the full blog and listen back to this episode or any other, you can find them at www.amyvetter.com/Breaking Beliefs podcast and related videos on my YouTube channel. For daily inspiration, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Amy Vetter CPA. I hope that you will choose to like this and subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and more, so that you can join us for more inspiration on our next episode.